I will focus on three of the many points that we were asked to address. I will try to talk about some influences I have been exposed to, and also particularly to the evolution of global change research and the future of global change research as I see it through the lens of my work on urbanization, urban areas as places, and global environmental change. And here I just will focus on carbon and climate issues. So let me start with who has defined me. In Latin America, many people have defined me, and I'm sure you don't know many of them, but particularly one has been key for me, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I always enjoy the magic way in which he tells stories, and I always wanted to tell stories the way he does, but I can't. But also, Brodel, a historian, always told us, he was not my teacher, but I read his stuff, and he always said that history matters. And then when I was exposed since 1999 to the global change community, I really was amazed by the challenge of connecting the global to the local. But what is more important, you are really striking me as very interesting people, and I'm very happy to be here. So, okay, that said, we already referred to that, and I'm glad that Tom and Deborah spoke about urbanization so much because they are saving me some time. So why is it that I am focusing on urbanization and urban areas if urban areas only occupy less than 3% of the global land surface? There are three reasons, and Deborah already referred to those. Scale is the first one. We have urbanized at unprecedented scales. Between 1950 and 2011, our urban world increased by fivefold. The other word that summarizes this is speed. If you take a look at some numbers, in 1900, we only had 12 cities of between 1 and 5 million. In 1950, we turned to have 75 cities. But look at this, in 2011, we have 447 cities. Deborah already referred to the issue of location and saved me a lot of time. I just would like to say that Latin America is one of the only subcontinents that experienced the urban transition during the post-war. Latin America is already urban. The ones that are urbanizing are, the countries that are urbanizing are in Asia and in Africa, as she correctly said. But what is important to know here is that we have an opportunity. The opportunity is given by the fact that these cities, and also the small and medium cities, are urbanizing. And if we have the political will, and if we have the tools, we can work to redirect their urbanization pathways. The challenge is given by the fact that many of the small cities that are located in these countries, and also in the US, do not have the resources they need to affect the necessary change. So let me now move to the fact, aware of this, at NCAR we are developing these urban future initiatives, and we are focusing on three key activities. The first one is to try to understand how urbanization and urban areas at different scales from the global to the local drive emissions, become hotspots of vulnerability, but also sources of capacity, and how actors from households to decision makers respond to the challenges these changes pose to them. We also, and again, you will see that I'm very obsessed with scale, we also try to develop city-level research that informs global-level efforts and vice versa. So that said, let me move to the second point, to the evolution of global change research. In efforts I have been involved in, we have found more and more that independent lines of research have advanced our understanding of some of the processes and dimensions involved in this interaction between urbanization as a multi-level, multi-dimensional process, urban areas also as multi-dimensional, and environmental change. But the challenge here is that notwithstanding all these advances, we have barely scratched the surface in our efforts to address, to understand, and also to respond to this challenge. And I will illustrate with some pieces of research how this is so. Let me start with an effort. I am part of the steering committee of the US Carbon Program. And last year, I came with the idea, guys, we need to bring together engineers, industrial ecologists, physical scientists, and social scientists to bear on the interaction between urbanization, urban areas, and the carbon cycle. And well, the sponsor said, okay, yes, we'll give you some money. We held this workshop at NCAR in October of last year. And we decided that for us to get our hands around this challenge, it was necessary to organize our discussion around 5 research questions. The first is, what do these disciplinary domains say about the key dimensions and process involved? The second, and that's very important, how do these interactions vary across space, time, and scale? And third key question, what are the uncertainties? And let me just give you an example of one we came up with during these discussions we had. We found that by 2050, the CO2 emissions related to urban energy use will be of between 9.6 and 11.2 pentagrams of carbon per year. These amounts, and this is not something I am aware of, but the physical scientists, the carbonologists, I call them, tell us that this amounts to over 500,000 of the uptake of carbon by the global terrestrial biosphere for the period between 2000 and 2009. Another key effort we came with, and this is, I mean, we are already, yesterday I received the good news that the synthesis paper will be published in Earth's Future. Well, another thing we did, and just remember all these beautiful diagrams some people were presented during the week. We came up with a framework that really puts urbanization and urban areas at the center of the conversation, just because they are really driving change globally, not only locally. So we decided that it was important to define 3 key subsystems: the natural system, and there is no natural thing, but okay, the built environment system that has to do with infrastructures and urban form and morphology, something the engineers have really studied very well, and what we call here the socio-institutional system that includes economy, demography, culture, and institutions. And we see how they relate with 3 key pools of the carbon cycle: the land pool, the aquatic pool that also has coastal elements here, and the atmospheric pool. We also are including drivers, biophysical and socioeconomic drivers. 2 other key questions we came up with are very important for decision making, to inform, to challenge, and to be challenged by decision making. One is when and how urbanization and urban areas lock in, such as there are limits to mitigation. Then, of course, we also need to understand what are the opportunities for change. What is the role of disasters, of innovations, of contestation as sources of change? So a key finding of our effort is that although we are trying to come together as interdisciplinary groups, we are still faced with difference in mental models, in definitions, in scope, in how we define key questions. And here just one example. In terms of research questions, engineers care a lot about the metabolism of cities and the life cycle of cities. We, as Deborah correctly said, care a lot about different dimensions of urbanization, such as affluence and economic growth and institutions and culture as they affect emissions. We also care a lot and have done a lot of work on the triggers of change. Good and bad change, because change is not always good. But again, the physical scientists care for carbon fluxes. I was always intrigued, and when I was first faced with the carbon community, they see the world in terms of boxes and fluxes. And that was so interesting, you know, I mean, because I don't see the world like that. So, okay, that's one example. But it's good. I mean, what they do is cool, guys. I mean, I really have learned to respect all these communities and to be humbled by them. So let me move to another example of how and why is it that we still need to do our homework. This is a meta-analysis we did of 224 cities globally. Our key question was, what are the determinants of urban populations' vulnerability to temperature hazards? We use this beautiful, what is the level of agreement and what is the amount of evidence thing. Wow. We say, okay, let's be serious about this. And of course, I mean, the colors refer to, for instance, this is hazards, this is sensitivity indicators, capacity indicators. But let me just go to the story I want to say here. The story is that we found we came up with three key findings. Of all the tallies we explored, we analyzed, we found that 13 factors, determinants, account for 66% of the tallies, and they are mostly located here. Positive means that the bigger the indicator, the bigger the vulnerability. Negative means that there is a negative relation, and this means that findings do not agree, or scholars do not agree. But another key finding, and this, I really like the idea of the cats and the dogs and the eagle. And I'm also glad that yesterday my colleagues really saved me so much time, because indeed there are three key schools of thought when addressing urban vulnerability to hazards. One is the top-down approach that mostly focuses on this part of the equation or of the framework already developed by the climate community. Then we have the bottom-up approach that mostly deals with this one. And then we have the resilience approach, the more integrated approach. I really embrace this one. But the key finding here is that of all the studies we analyze, only 6% use this approach. The most dominant approach is the top-down approach. So, we talk a lot, but what is the empirical evidence to say and to evaluate where we are? Another key finding, guys, and this speaks by itself, this is the location of the cities. Can you tell me how much we have done to explore what's going on in the most vulnerable countries of the world? I mean, we have a lot to do here. Okay, so let me move to the future. I'm going. Whoa! I can't believe it. Okay, so what I see again through the lens of my own research as the challenges and the way forward, and this really relates to something I want to suggest to this wonderful conversation. What we need are approaches that complement. We do not need to forget about disciplinary approaches. They are key, they are important, and they are doing a good work. But we need to complement them and combine them into interdisciplinary and co-produced research. And I want to suggest three key elements here, and then I will close with some remarks. So what we need to do is to combine quantitative and qualitative methods, and I will show you why. We need to capture multiple scales. We cannot continue just focusing on the global or the local on the long term or the short term. We need to combine them. And we need to really focus a lot on capacity. Whenever I work with communities and with decision makers in the cities I work with in Latin America, Asia, and just now in the US, I always hear them telling me, don't tell me that I'm vulnerable. I don't like to hear that. Tell me what I can do. Tell me how you can empower me to do the right thing. So I'm focusing more and more on capacity and on resilience. So let me tell you why scale. I mean, the issue of concern, the issue we want to analyze varies with the spatial, temporal, and also analytical scale we decide to focus on. And that really defines biases and also uncertainties. Let me give you one example. This is work we did in Latin American cities to explore health risks and vulnerabilities. And look, this is a temporal series where we correlate and we want to see what is the relationship between exposure to PM10s, and we have other pollutants, and then exposure to mortality, to temperature and mortality. And you can see, I mean, when you analyze exposure to pollutants, there is a positive correlation, meaning the higher the exposure to, or the higher the level of pollutant, the higher the mortality. That's not the case with temperature. And that was for me like, darn, I wanted to focus on heat waves. And no, it's cold waves that people are suffering from. Okay, let me now move to the spatial scale. And I remember Tom Wilbans talking about that. And I want to provide empirical evidence. Yes, I'm there. So we did this with data at the country level. And we wanted to explore the dynamics of urbanization shaping vulnerability and capacity. Two key findings. First one, it is not only exposure what matters, and many global level studies focus on exposure. As you can see here in our clustering of countries, when you use indicators of exposure to 4 hazards, all countries or every country, every group of countries are equally at risk from exposure to those. Things change when you include indicators of sensitivity and adaptive capacity. It's mostly sub-Saharan and these areas that are more at risk. But are they at risk because of their level of urbanization? If that was the case, then these countries, which are highly urbanized, would be more at risk. And that's not the case. It is the pace at which they are urbanizing that also matters. But again, you could say, wow, Latin America should be okay. But no, that's not the case. And with Karen O'Brien and other scholars, we have made the claim that once you look at other scales, and here I couldn't include data of analysis we are doing at the country level. If you move at the country level, then you will find that some cities are more vulnerable than others. And then if you move to other levels, from household to city level, you will find a couple of things. You will find that depending on the level you are working with, you will have different determinants of capacities to respond. You will also find different abilities to respond, from coping, meaning moving your belongings to the upper level, to really more structural elements such as slum upgrading or dealing with integrated risk management. So again, what matters here is that we move from one scale to the other and not only focus on one level. So I'm closing.
1 minute.
Yes, I'm closing. This is this. And the finale. Okay? So, to close. So let's go for the utopia. I mean, we always see that democracy is an utopia. Doing integrative and interdisciplinary science that is co-produced is another utopia. And we need to understand what are the barriers, what are the options, how do we go there? So I'm suggesting some options. In terms of urbanization, we need to work with the most holistic concept of urbanization and to see the relative weight of different dimensions in explaining emissions and risk. something I learned from engineers is that we need to understand that cities are also artifacts, built environments. They have infrastructures, and those cannot be changed at will. It takes time to change those. We need to deal with couplings. Usually, engineers deal with sectors, with little things, and they don't see the integration. And the engineers have suggested me to deal with infrastructures that address these issues of emissions and resilience. And also, we need to deal with the interdependencies between infrastructures themselves and the soft institutions. They call them soft infrastructures, I call them institutions, that also define where investments are made, how they are made, what role power and values play in this. A key element here, and Deborah also referred to it, is that we need to come with robust typologies of urban areas that include level of income, maturity of the city, urban form, economic function, and governance arrangements and geography. And this is my finale. So, what we also need, and this is like democracy, right? Or like happiness. If we want to be happy, we need to work for it. So we need to develop interdisciplinary science where no domain can merely be an add-on to a research agenda driven only from another domain, and vice versa. So I think that's what we need to work with, and we shouldn't forget that the Earth is our home, and we need to work to make it better and nicer. Thank you.
Yeah.